Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us ahead of the general election.
Yeah, really happy to do it.
All right, so to start things off here, Proposition 1 will be on the ballot in New York State. What is your stance on this, and what do you tell voters who may be on the fence about it?
Look, women's healthcare decisions are women's healthcare decisions, and what the Equal Rights Amendment will do is put Roe v. Wade back into law. Women depended on that constitutional right for decades, and we just saw it ripped away by the Supreme Court. And so what this proposition will do is undo that damage. I think it's also really important to remember at the federal level what's happening with this. When I get to Congress, I'm going to sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act. That's legislation that will put Roe v. Wade back into law. My opponent has a very different view on this. Not only has he failed to sponsor that legislation, he's actually voted 13 times to restrict access to abortion services.
Yeah, and moving along here, the border remains a contested issue throughout the country. In August, a Peruvian national wanted for murder was arrested in Broome County. The incident charged political conversations about the border. If elected, what will you do for the border?
Look, politicians from both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have massively failed on this issue. They're too busy playing games with it, pointing fingers at each other, and I'm so frustrated, like so many of your viewers are, with all of the politics around this. It's time for the politicians from both parties to stop screwing around and secure the border. My plan would send thousands of additional Border Patrol agents to the border. I think we should build physical barriers where it makes sense to do that. There was a bipartisan bill that was supported by the Border Patrol Union that would have solved this problem months ago. I would have supported that bill. My opponent opposed that bill because he's more interested in having a problem to campaign on than solving the problem. And not only did he reject a solution to the problem, all he has had to offer voters over the last couple of months on this issue are deranged conspiracy theories about immigrants eating pets. I mean, that is not somebody who is serious about solving this problem. So, I've been critical of both parties. I'm serious about getting the job done.
And what is your stance on abortion rights?
I want to be very, very clear on this. I believe that abortion is health care, and women's health care decisions are women's health care decisions, and politicians and the government should stay out of it. These are some of the most difficult and painful decisions that families have to make. And the last thing they need are politicians knocking on the door and saying, here's what you can and cannot do. I trust families to make these difficult decisions. And this is a real contrast in this race between my opponent and me. I commit to sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act when I get to Congress. That is a promise I am making to voters. That law would undo the damage from the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned. My opponent's record on this is very different. He has been a politician for over 30 years, and in his 3 decades in office, he has been anti-choice every single step of the way. So it was no surprise when he got to Congress and he voted not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times. He voted 13 times to restrict women's access to abortion services. And while he was doing all of that, he refused to sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act. And on top of all of that, when he was behind closed doors in the fall of 2022, he expressed his support for an abortion ban. I believe women's health care decisions are women's health care decisions. I go to Congress, I'm going to put Roe v. Wade back into law.
Well, housing is an issue that is frequently tackled by local elected officials. How would you ensure the federal government is able to assist state and local governments that are receiving adequate funding for housing?
It's an issue all across this district, and particularly so here in the Triple Cities. A massive shortage of housing. It's driving up costs. Middle-class families are having a really hard time paying the rent, paying the mortgage. So some things that I would like to do around this. Number one, right now you have all these Wall Street private equity firms that are running around gobbling up single-family homes. And what they do is they use the homes to then squeeze as much profit out of them as possible. We've got to stop allowing housing to be a driver of profits in this country and get back to it being a human right and a source of shelter. Look, I grew up in an EJ house on Burtsell Street in West Endicott, and those houses, they all looked the same. It was a really tight-knit, blue-collar, middle-class community. And those houses were provided to the workers for $1 down, a 0% mortgage. And that's how you build a strong middle class in this country. You give working folks an opportunity to share in the rewards of their labor. So we've got to get back to that. One really important thing that I think we need to do at the federal level is build a lot of new housing. In some ways, this problem isn't all that complicated. We just don't have enough housing, and so we need to build more affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I mean not just low income, but really for the middle class. And so we should make the investments that are necessary to construct that housing. And I think it's really important that when we do that, we're using local labor unions to do it, because we want to make sure the wages are good. We want to make sure those economic benefits stay in the community. If we can increase the housing stock, do it using local labor, it would relieve a lot of the pressure that we're seeing today.
Well, there is an overlap in the conversations about gun safety and mental health. Do you see these issues as one and the same, and what would be steps you would take to address both?
To some extent. I also think it's really important that we remember and recognize that the vast majority of folks dealing with mental health conditions are not violent. And in fact, people with mental health challenges are actually more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. I don't want us to be in a situation where we're stigmatizing mental health challenges or disincentivizing people to get the help that they need. With respect to public safety more generally, I come from a family where my grandpa was an avid hunter. My mom was in law enforcement. I do think there are some reasonable common sense things we can do to make our communities safer. One example that I've worked on throughout my career, I don't believe that if you are convicted of domestic violence that you should have access to a firearm. I think the data show that that is one of the most surefire ways to put women and children in danger in this country. And so I have advocated throughout my career to make sure that if you're convicted of domestic violence, you don't have access to a firearm. It's a real contrast with my opponent. When he was in the state legislature, he voted to allow domestic violence convicts to get access to guns. I think that's irresponsible.
Well, the Southern Tier is no stranger to natural disasters. Many people still have anxiety from the floods of 2006 and 2011. This year, New York State recorded 32 tornadoes, the most since 1950. How will you address the cost of natural disasters, and what will you do to ensure the state is prepared for these severe storms?
I look at this in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, we need to make updates to the federal emergency response policies that we have in place. For example, where I live now in Ithaca, on the south side of Ithaca, there were just some updates to the flood maps there. And so access to flood insurance and making sure flood insurance is affordable and accessible is an issue in communities like that. And it will be even more of an issue as climate change continues to persist. And so we should look at mitigation and emergency response and make sure that they're well funded so that every time we have one of these natural disasters, it's not a bunch of politicians scrambling around trying to put a Band-Aid on it. We're able to respond quickly and appropriately. I get really frustrated when you see communities struggling with various issues, and then the politicians are off giving billions of dollars of tax cuts to big corporations and billionaires, and then when it comes time to take care of people who actually need it, they say, we can't afford it. We got our priorities all wrong in this country, and this is one of the areas where that's the case. Longer term, though, I think what this goes to is fighting climate change. And I think climate change is an existential threat, the biggest threat that's facing my kids' generation for sure. But because it's such a big challenge, I also see it as a huge opportunity for us to rebuild our local economy. You know, I come from an EJ family. My folks came here over 100 years ago to work in EJs as tanners. And I'm really proud of that because they made the boots that soldiers wore when we trampled fascism. I think that's a real source of pride that we did that here. When IBM was founded, it was initially the Computing, Tabulating, and Recording Company. And one of the things they did, and my family worked there too, one of the things they did was made the punch cards that we needed to get the Social Security Administration up and running. I mean, think about something as ambitious as the New Deal at a time when we don't have computers. But we were able to make that happen here in the Triple Cities by making those punch cards and making those technologies at the time. My folks worked in the IBM plants for a long time. And the circuit boards that we made here in the Triple Cities brought the world a technology revolution. I say all of that because it's my pride in our manufacturing history here that makes me so hopeful for what we can accomplish in the future when it comes to fighting climate change. My vision for upstate New York's economy in the future is that we are again the center of American manufacturing. We're making solar panels here. We're making lithium-ion batteries here. We're making wind turbines here. We're making the things that we need to save the world, and there's really nowhere better equipped to do it than here in the Triple Cities.
And what needs to be done to quell the opioid epidemic here in the district?
Yeah, this is something that has really ripped through a lot of communities across upstate New York. It ripped through the neighborhood where I was born and raised in West Endicott. One of my friends who lived down on the corner on Bertzel Street was killed because of the opioid epidemic. Another friend from a couple blocks over, same thing. One of my best friend's moms was killed because of it. So I've seen the devastation it has caused, and I look at the response to it in a couple of ways. Number one, in the immediate term, we have got to secure the border. We have to get these politicians to stop screwing around, stop playing games with this, and secure the damn border. It is so frustrating to see fentanyl coming across the border and then have politicians like my opponents sitting on their hands because they want to use it as a political issue during campaign season when you've got families that are really struggling. So secure the border. There is technology that is literally just sitting on a shelf collecting dust that we could use to detect the fentanyl coming across the border. And the politicians, both the Democrats and the Republicans, are screwing around so badly that they can't even get the funding to get that technology out. So secure the border to keep the fentanyl out is one thing. Second, I want to see us have a surge in treatment capacity. Here in Broome County back in 2017, I advocated in a bipartisan way for a treatment facility to come open. I know that that is in such high demand and we just don't have enough beds available for folks. And too often people end up falling through the cracks. They end up in the criminal justice system where, you know, that's not good for law enforcement, it's not good for the taxpayers, and it's not good for people who just need access to substance abuse services. So there's those two things. And then I think longer term, it kind of goes back to rebuilding the middle class, rebuilding the economy with good jobs and good wages, because all of the data and all of the science show that if you have a strong middle class and a strong economy, addiction and substance abuse go down. And so longer term, that's the solution to the problem as I see it.
Well, the political environment is currently heated across the nation. What do you think needs to be done for the country to work together and to ease political tension?
I'm a Democrat and I come from a Republican family, so I love this question. I take a lot of pride as a Democrat running for Congress in a very divided district in making sure I'm spending a lot of time in places that, frankly, Democrats historically have not shown up. And I get to talk to people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different political persuasions. And this experience of running for Congress in upstate New York has convinced me in my heart and soul that we as people are nowhere nearly as divided as our politics would have us seem. If the only thing you knew about American politics is what you saw on cable news every night or what was happening in the, within the establishment, you would think that we were hopelessly divided. And what I've actually found talking to folks, the first question I ask is never, are you a Democrat or Republican? It's never, who are you voting for? It's always, what keeps you up at night? What are the conversations you and your family are having at the kitchen table? And through those conversations, I have found we just share so much in common. There's so much more that unites us as upstate New Yorkers than divides us. And so I think it's just a matter of giving each other the benefit of the doubt, treating each other with decency, and really being willing to have those conversations with people who might not share your political views.
Well, you are facing off against the same opponent as you did in 2022. Do you have any ideas that have evolved since your last race against him?
I think one of the biggest differences from our 2022 campaign to this campaign is that he now has a voting record. It's one thing for a politician, as he did in his last campaign, to just make a bunch of promises. It's another thing to be held accountable for your voting record. And so, for example, he made some promises about lowering costs. I think most of your viewers, if you ask them, they would say they're still really struggling to make ends meet. My opponent took nearly $1 million in corporate PAC checks, and you can draw a line from the checks that he's cashing to the votes that he's taking, to the challenges that folks are having across upstate New York, whether it's the thousands of dollars he's taken from the pharmaceutical industry and then opposes lowering those costs, whether it's the tens of thousands of dollars he's taken from the utility monopolies while letting them jack up rates, whether it's the $200,000 he's taken from the big ag monopolies while they crush our small farmers and jack up groceries. I don't take any corporate PAC money. I never have, I never will, because I believe that our politics are just way too corrupt, and we've got to get the corporate PAC money out of our politics to start having politics in a government that works for people instead of for just the special interests. He made a bunch of promises with respect to abortion rights, and then he turned around and voted 13 times to restrict those. He made a bunch of promises about his plans for community safety, and as you mentioned at the top, we just had a Peruvian gang leader in my hometown because he has failed to secure the border and do his job. So I think that's the biggest difference from the last race to this one.
And in your debate with WNYT, you mentioned several times that both Republicans and Democrats need to be held responsible for the issues the country is facing. If elected, how will you hold members of both parties accountable?
I think one thing people know about me is that I'm an independent voice. I say it like I see it. That's certainly been the case with respect to immigration and the border. I've been a very vocal critic of my own party, particularly the Biden administration on that. And look, my view on this is that the most bipartisan thing in Congress is the corruption. 90% of these politicians in Washington, both parties, are taking a ton of corporate PAC money, and then they go to office and they do what's best for the corporate PACs that are lining their pockets and not what's best for families on Bertzel Street where I grew up. And so I'm running for Congress to change that. I don't take any corporate PAC money. When I got into this, everybody told me, Josh, you got to take it or else you're not going to be able to compete. We're going to prove a lot of people wrong, that you can run a grassroots campaign, reject the corporate PAC money, and make a real difference here. I'm supporting term limits because I think we have way too many career politicians and we need new voices and we need new ideas. One of the things I want to do is ban the politicians from trading stocks when they're in office. You have all these politicians who just happen to be really good at playing the market. I think it's because of the inside information they have, and they go in and instead of it being about public service, it's about personal enrichment. That's got to stop too. So there's a whole host of things that I'm pushing for that I don't see as Democratic or Republican issues. I see those as issues about giving power back to people and taking it away from the political establishment and the special interests.
Well, thank you once again for sitting down with us ahead of the general election.
Really happy to do it anytime.